Like, do y'all want us to pass just the advocacy statement sheet, or do you just want all of it?
Is it also
The only thing,
everything?
the advocacy statement is not in the email chain.
Then just the advocacy statement, I guess.
And then I'll give you this book, and you know which part of that we're reading. Well, thank you all for being here. I, for one, am exhausted. And, you know, full. Let me know when people are good. Yeah. It's should on the right side of the page. Is it disabled? Nah, y'all had to chat. Right? I don't think so.
Okay, I'm there now. Okay, I'm in now. It just appeared, shut up.
You okay?
Oh, we're just trying to make sure you had access to the chat.
So is that you?
That's right, I'm good.
I'm actually doing good.
You good?
Yeah, I had a little nap in the parking lot of a Party City.
I always see you napping. That's very specific.
That's really
That's real. That's something to say about the big boy.
Yeah,
I had to go
like-
find a
I feel like I always see you napping
That
those
was-
tournaments.
It's a good 30-minute nap, so I'm fresh.
Yeah, before he started that for sure.
All right.
What the hell is going on with football? Did you see that stare down between Taylor? I said, what was happening with your stare down?
I was just asking.
Everybody good? 5 arguments for why all national health insurance is bad. 1. Comprehensive comes from the French comprehensive, meaning containing much in comparatively small limits. I contain much in comparatively small limits. 2. National comes from the old French nation, from the old Latin nasi, from the Proto-Indo-European gen, meaning to give birth. Baguette, it connects nation to natal to nascent to native to nature. I am all 4 of these things. When the concept of nationhood was defined, it was defined by, quote, a proven capacity for conquest. I am hoping to conquer myself. 3. Health comes from the old English health, wholeness, a being whole, sound, or well, from the Proto-Indo-European root kalo, meaning whole, uninjured, or good omen, from the old Norse helge, meaning holy, sacred. What is healthcare without health? What is health without the sacred? Perhaps the healing of health hurts the hearth of the soul. Perhaps the soul is just another word for what we whisper to ourselves so we can fall asleep. Perhaps academic writing is how we pretend we aren't so lonely. 4. Insurance comes from the word insure, which comes from the old French insurer, meaning in, meaning to make, and insure, meaning safe, secure, undoubted. You should insure me here. They'll concede this argument. It'll cost them the round. 5. Medical comes from the Indo-European root med, which means to take appropriate measure. It connects medical to medicine, to moderate, to model, to modern, to mold, to must. I connect medical to the medicine tested on native children. Medicine to moderation of boarding schools, universities, debate rounds. Moderation to modeling native and black debaters to be happy and productive members of civil society. Modeling to modernity. Modernity to mold, sociogenic mold, to must vote affirmative, to take appropriate measure. If bodies could rust, we would be falling apart. The law mandates that a hate crime can only be classified as such if there is ample evidence to show that one's actions were motivated by prejudice towards an individual's nationality, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, etc. Oh, I got one. Some more than others know that all objects can be put to violent use. If our bodies could rust, we would be falling apart. Oh, I got one. Barbara Kintner, 34, was hit in the stomach by a trailer hitch thrown at her from a moving car. After throwing the hitch, a blonde 18-year-old man yelled, "Oh, I got one." Her sister saw and heard everything. No one should have to watch a world explode like that. No one should have to watch someone become embodied like that. The CDC reported that the police should not investigate the assault as a hate crime because there were, quote, no comments which made any reference to race or ethnicity. Oh, I got one. It is the basic syntax. One is the subject and she's at the mercy of the I. This is a semiotics of indigeneity that routs us into death worlds. It is the mouths of grim reapers of the world. Grammar is excited by violence. Oh, I got one. What did he see when he made her into a ghost? What is a ghost but the form we take when we are pulled outside of our bodies? Oh, I got one. What did he see? Well, there are memories made that do not disappear with the disappeared. Kintner was sent home by doctors so her loved ones could witness her parting. How can a living room become a church without grief leaving its indelible mark? Oh, I got one. How do we live at the edge of the world? Oxford. 5. Oxford University embroiled in race row as students are told to be vigilant after black man seen on grounds. Christina Sharp says that anti-blackness is a total climate, that anti-blackness is pervasive as climate. It is the weather. In Oxford, the Wetherell's University speak of blackness as that which begets vigilance, as that which is an unauthorized person, as that which catches some unaware. Those of us who study and live in Oxford know that the weather is always gray, but it is also anti-black. 7. Your body is a catch-22. How does one survive losing one's bearings without an exit strategy? For philosopher Jill Stauffer, one can feel resistance to existence when their sense of autonomy disappears from the realm of everyday life. It can occur when one cannot escape what Cornell West has called the normative gaze of the white man. The normative gaze of the white man is the air you breathe. It makes a jail out of your lungs. This is what it is to live in existential limbo. God's river. A body bag is a gun, is a smallpox blanket, is a treaty, call it a medicine chest. Wait for the autopsy. They call it H1N1, you call it the pass system. Bodies like these can only leave if they're on stretchers. Call it moving. Someone says, it's like sending body bags to soldiers in Afghanistan. Remind them that Canada is 400 Afghanistans. Call it colonialism. To live in the trenches like these is to be a civilian casualty and a soldier all at once. Call it a suicide epidemic. Wonder how many deaths it takes for a country to call itself God. Think maybe reserve is another word for morgue, is another word for body bags. Call it home anyways. An elegy for the flesh. We don't yet have a word to make sense of the initial sense of loss, of a body feeling like it doesn't belong to you anymore. Sometimes the act of enduring itself becomes too much to bear and you forget how to go on in a world that didn't want you in the first place. How do you mourn something you can still see in the mirror? I am seeking an intimacy beyond the synchronous presence of flesh. We do not have an institutional home. We are the unhoused, left scavenging for ways to go on because waiting is the hardest thing to keep up with. To be queer and native and alive is to repeatedly bear witness to worlds being destroyed over and over again. We need a mode of being together in homelessness, that other side that emerges neither from self-consciousness nor knowledge of the other, but in the void of the unasked question. The world we want is waiting in the breakages between now and the next. What might get us there? Thus, we affirm the resolution as an affective comments of loneliness, to ensure a way of being for and with the spectrality of homelessness. 1. I have started to fall in love with my sadness. I have found that I laugh a little harder when holding back tears, that my writing is sharper when I can't sleep, that I laugh a little harder when I'm lonely. I think I'm learning how to be alone. I think I'm figuring out what my passions are. I'm reading books like I'm in 7th grade again. I'm figuring out how to write love poems to myself. What I'm saying is that I think I'm falling in love with my pain. I have realized the days are more beautiful when the sky is cloudy. I have realized that sad poems touch more hearts than happy ones. I have realized that it is okay to be wounded. What I'm trying to say is that I think I'm falling in love with my pain. I think this might be an abusive relationship, but falling in love with your wounds might not be healthy, but I think it's better than pretending they aren't there. I think it's better than being upset they haven't healed yet. I think it's better than worrying about if they ever heal. I always wanted my life to get better and better, but maybe it's better and more important to be able to love myself even if I doesn't. What I'm saying is that I've stopped comparing today to yesterday. What I'm saying is that I've stopped dreaming of the future. What I'm saying is that I hope the future never comes. I'm being killed by time. I'm killing time. This is killing time. My native tongue doesn't translate well to heavy silences and broken sobs and quickening heartbeats. My eyes have not yet adjusted to the darkness, and I cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel because I think I'm trapped in a cage. I have redefined success to include the broken parts of me. I have started to see anxiety, depression, and loneliness as part of a healthy disposition, and I've realized that I'm better off accepting that they're here to stay than trying to make them leave before their time. I'll stop feeling angst when I stop feeling pain. I'll stop writing sad poetry when I learn to let go, and I'll stop being in love when I stop feeling sad. 2. Tomorrow will not be better than today. I will still be sad. I will still be hurt. I will still be anxious. But that's okay. I'm loving myself even if I'm broken. I'm loving myself even if I'm a fool. I'm loving myself even if I don't know why I'm being self-destructive. Part of loving yourself is loving yourself even if you aren't going to get better. It's realizing that being broken doesn't mean that you gotta be fixed. It's realizing it's okay if you can't be fixed. This is a love poem to those of us who aren't going to get better. This is a love poem telling you that I love you, and that I love your pain, and your sadness, and your brokenness, even if you don't. This is a love poem asking you to realize that loving ourselves doesn't just mean loving the parts that we like, it means loving all of you, and that includes the broken parts. And trust me, I'm not romanticizing pain. I'm not trying to put your tears on a pedestal. I'm not trying to pretend that suicidal thoughts are sexy. What I'm saying is that they're there. And if they're there, then we might as well stop trying to pretend that they aren't. If they're going to be there, then I might as well learn to love them. If they're going to be there, then I might as well learn to understand them. If they're going to be there, then I might as well learn to live with them. Maybe I don't have to be happy all the time. Maybe it's okay to be sad. Maybe it's okay to be broken. I'm tired of being told that it's a chemical imbalance if there's a fucking baseline that fucking Johnny-Go-Lucky has and I don't. I'm tired of being told to stop dwelling on it as if I chose to live here. I'm so fucking tired. 3. People who jump off the Golden Gate Bridge say that they regretted it halfway down. I don't think that I'm halfway down with it. This is a world is nothing if not a tribute to the potentiality of sadness. The showing that a body unbecome, our poetics of lateness, our choreography of mangled bodies might change the rhetoric of protest. And the ethics of indigenous resistance needs to tune into the depressed and crying kukums and the worlds that fall from their faces. Is it possible to share the feeling of being lonely or alone as a way to make new forms of collectivity? Loneliness is endemic to the affective life of settler colonialism. But that it is also an affective commons of sorts demonstrates that there is something about this world that isn't quite right. That loneliness, in fact, evinces a new world on the horizon. I'm going to see it.
Okay.
Also, if you want this book.
So I think it was point 3 or point 4 you made. What does it mean to insure you?
Yeah,
Or
so a couple
E/I
things
insure.
here.
I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, so we actually make a distinction between the E and the I on the test, but I think it's important. So first is like to make secure, right? So we can debate this from a potentially violent space, and we think that's important to understand the ways in which we can make it less violent or at least produce something that isn't inherently terrible. The insure in terms of the I there, I think, is also kind of play on what it means for insurance to avoid risk or to prepare for risk, and how that happens in the
So
context.
you say you have to insure you. Does
Sure.
that mean the judges are voting to like take risk away from you and to protect you?
No, so I want to be clear here. I think that there's a false distinction, or at least the poems, and I think the thing that I read and makes a claim that there's a false distinction between kind of the speaking of I and the universality of the affective commons that exist in those who are living in the afterlife of genocide and slavery.
Okay,
That
cool.
they're kind of, yeah.
Speaking of that, what is affect and what is the affective commons?
Sure. So I guess affect really in its like simplest terms. Actually, I'll let you define. What do you think affect means?
So I think in the context of affective commons is both at some level a motive of the way in which meaning becomes constituted relationally, right? So in the context of commons of loneliness, it would be the way in which what it means to be alone, what it means to be sad are kind of constituted by relationship.
Who is in this affective commons?
Black and Native.
Black and Native people only? What does it mean
Yeah.
for like Kozak and the NRV?
Yeah, so a couple
approve
things
that.
here. Yeah, a couple things here. So one, we think the judge is an evaluator of arguments. We don't think that the point of the 1AC is to say that like anyone here is caring for us or is part of an affective commons or is taking or attempt to resolve the loneliness. We don't think that's the role of judge or anyone in this round. We think rather we've presented a method that is able to grapple with not only the kind of violences that exist in the world, but create method and analysis of how to deal with them.
Are there more than one ways to like kind of create an affective loneliness, like to be together to share it? Because you said you have a method. Are there other methods of this?
So I wouldn't say that it's like a method of how to be together, but poesis and the kind of affirmation of homelessness is not only one that creates something new and allows us to access this commons that sure we can have a multitude of ways of being formed with each other.
How do
But
you
also-
understand
Yeah.
who has a better method for accessing these commons?
Yeah, so I guess a couple things here. I guess you could say that our method is violent. You could say that it's not effective. You could say that
No, I'm not asking you what we should say to your method. I'm saying how would judges evaluate methods of access to
Oh,
the
sure.
commons?
So this is kind of our argument about poesis, the kind of value of interpreting the resolution, that we can kind of have differential understandings of how the resolution produces things like loneliness, home, and the way in which people relate to that, right? So that's our argument about disoccupying the kind of figure of home and the way in which that is.
So there's like multiple relations to it.
I
And
don't
multiple
know
ways
what
of
you mean by
approaching.
multiple
No,
relations are there.
Jacob just said that there are like multiple approaches to the resolution.
Yeah,
So
we-
We have offered a particular one that we think is good.
Yeah, no. You can just flow this next to the case. Actually, start credit for a second. Okay, stop. Just said check something.
What's
Yeah. Nice.
Should I have already received it?
no.
Oh, okay, I just want to make sure that wasn't my computer was in order.
Black women are forced to be the caretakers or receptacles for the world's emotional and physical baggage without recompensation for their labor. This is not a choice but a forced position. The act then injects a form of forced care by black women by making them responsible for your catharsis or forced to negate those that she is brought to carry in the very first place by the world department. In 16, when North labor comes in view as absent gender differential, women's labor falls outside the count of the black strike. Black women refuse work in the plantation. Neither the features nor for life or abolition, racial labors, rather than freedom was the only way to conceive to remedy the wound dealt her. It's difficult to say black women's labors within the narratives of British black radicalism. Where exactly is a broken mother still in wet nurse within the strike? Is impossible to manage the paramedic slave. Black women contribute to role. They're part of the White House, of course, before the fugitive labor. Necessary for the white families expense their own defacements, interrelations, or independent labor for the subsistence of position that is referred and reviled as slavery and neglected. If an Irish uncertainty and refusal, what is impossible domestic fitting, what divisions are encouraged to one, and she's still awaiting your survival isn't achieved. If we intend to impose another burden of black female flesh by making a placeholder for freedom, it's not pursuit of pile. She provides you so much, yet rarely does she thrive. Her role has been fixed as provider of care, which is very mode of her exploitation and presumption. There is no reason articulated to vote aft. The ballot is not essential to articulating the necessity of loving yourself or loving one's woundedness, then there's no reason to vote aft, but links to all of our offense we've articulated about debate. Now the next argument is parameters. The act should have one, a clear way for the judge to delineate between one method and another, i.e. forms of self-love without simply stacking black self-love or self-love that Nico does against each other in sort of oppression Olympics. The two, and the second part is a matrix for evaluating which method is better. They have no definition on what the affective commons of loneliness is besides pure relationality. They have no means to measure that or who is engaged with it or why the negative has not already been doing that in the first place, which necessarily collapse into arbitrary distinctions on behalf of judge based on the performance of her affect, which recreates violence. Now, there's an affective investment to set to the act discussion of the affective commons. Presentation of a population suffering or theory without proposed material aid. Action plays into a liberal economy of exchange where judges / debaters feel an affective resonance and invest in a necropolitical form of inclusion where they fetishistically feel their way into oppression but never do any work to resolve it, causing net more violence, which in turn turns their solvency. Now, selected 13. The mass mediation of allowing audience identifications in the affective capacity to bracket structural and historical antagonism by half of finding a way to connect with the feeling of belonging to a larger world to be genre means it is a structure of a conventional expectation that people rely on to provide a certain kinds of affective intensities, insurances. The text of cultivate fantasies of fake belongings, alleviation of social antagonism, exploitation, recognition in and by a social group, being emotionally literate, each other's experience of power and discontent. Women's culture was the first mass market into the public. Bourgeois white women mobilized fantasies while black and working class interiority based on suffering must feel like in order to find a language for their own suffering. Compassionate liberalism is sandpaper and the racist monument whose structural solidity ensues in the intimate sphere. A soft supremacy rooted in compassion and coercive identification, visibly exoticizing and diminishing the inconvenient and the non-compliant. The problem is of naming what appears when a collectivity is created by biopower, class antagonism, nationalism, imperialism, and the law media by capital organized by pleasure. Intimate publics elaborate themselves through commodity culture organized by fantasies of transcending a public is intimate with a foreground affective and emotional attachments located in fantasies of the common, rich with local recognition, both of narration to absorb viewers in the positions of the subjectivity that serve the convergence of social and economic objectives. The code in the gaze will count as collectivity has been a market structure juxtapolitical sphere where people attach to each other by a sense that there is a common emotional world marked by the historical burden of being harshly treated, a sense of identification. And their Belcourt's poem about the way that a black man is criminalized in Oxford affectively cannot be separated from the form of poetry which articulates blackness as a filial concept attached to the representation embedded in poetry by non-black people. Johnson at 15, Goldsmith's poem, The Body of Michael Brown. It sounds like the autopsy report of Michael Brown. It's a crisp great day here at the introductory conference as Goldsmith smoothly reads to the extent of Michael Brown's injuries, pausing here and there for dramatic effect. Something is off by Goldsmith's tone, the giddy somberness, the way some people giggle when they deliver bad news, like they aren't sure what else to do. I'm starting to get angry. I want to raise one to stop this, to slow things down, but I don't. The whole description feels sexual. Goldsmith's voice rises slightly in pitch as he reaches the climax of a 30-minute poem. There's a sensation you get as a black American academia, a complicated feeling of hopeless rage that cannot be quelled unless explicitly penned in to try and interpret and illustrate the violence that's wrought upon black bodies. Here, Michael Brown's body referred to over and over as a body. The body. How dare you make poetry born out of a medicalized, dehumanized body? How dare you present in the space filled with privileged people playing at radical pulse at the sight of horrible interventions and poems and lines of code. The black body in this obvious kidnapping. She explained for her it felt like Goldsmith physically took Michael Brown's body, chewed it up and spat it out, exhibiting only for the institutionally bright mind to see. Presents a troubling model of the black body that possibly this figure somehow producing increased representation for black both furthers a reduction of black personhood and insults the very notion of representation as a political or collective engagement. And the app's attachment to the violence of the world recreates violence moments of humanism and the internalization of a repertoire of screens of images of death and negativity, which locks in psychic violence. Oliver and Ford. Psychic space turns psychic phenomena into property, but also turns the past into property. Conceiving outside the economy of property requires imagining the past outside linear genealogy, imagining action outside cause and effect. This is a challenge of view. This future is predetermined by the past. The past is not a stable commodity within this economy. The past becomes a possession that justifies exploitation and civilizing mission. The black person, the change of the past invented by the white man. The past becomes a fortress in which time is defended.
defended against different possible futures. Fanon says that any new humanism must begin by giving up the notion that the past is inherent, the future bars a different future beyond domination, even if the past or subject positions are framed by them. We are not determined by them, for the future is determined by the past, and there is no hope of change. We can imagine the act of having properties to legitimize them, and then we can begin to live without reducing our action to commodities. This may seem utopian, the necessity of a secular rebellious hope that authority can take the seed of its own transformation. To realize this hope, we need to rethink our relation to time and to the past. And their conceptual frame of violence in the tags of normative white gaze and their discussion of Cornell West and their tags is a liberal move to innocence, because violence is not marked by a normativity, i.e. deviance from whiteness as a constitutive relationship by which people are marked in relation to, but a constitutive value founded in opposition to blackness, which means the act necessarily gives cover to the violence of non-black people who can articulate themselves as non-white. Paragraph 16. Blacks continue to be constitutionally denied symbolic membership within civil society, and such no analogical bridge exists through which black will await a war position that junior partner status according to non-black people. The exclusion of blackness of humanism is not whiteness or white supremacy, but humanity is an anti-black structure and antagonist of black life, since humanity's understanding of its own subjecthood as value is coherent only so long as it's measured against black flesh.
Now? Pretty good. Okay. I'm curious about the second kind of part of this Hartman evidence that says, or black women are forced to meet those she's brought to care for. Can you just unpack exactly what you mean by that, and two, like, why is that
Well,
particularly
one,
bad?
when the top of the app says that the judges should vote to insure you, and the neg will drop this, which ensures we lose, proves the sort of binary that the app has articulated, which is that the neg has to be a corrective or a solvency for why the app could have been done better or done in a different way, which fixes black women as the laborer.
I guess my question is, how is this distinct from a normative rule of the negative, which has to negate the app?
Our argument is that the presentation of pain itself operates in two ways. One, in a symbolic economy that has always over-determined black women as needing to be carers or failing. And two, it operates within the world in which black women have internalized images of negativity, where if they don't care, they have themselves.
So I guess my second question is, what is care?
In terms of the care in the context of the Hartman evidence, is any attempt to sort of deal with the presentation of pains of the app, even if it's
Okay, so this kind of idea of dealing with pains, my question I guess then
It's
is,
a question
what
of like
constitutes-
relief of pain.
Yeah, sure,
How do you
but
describe
what
it?
is, you talk about images of pain, what constitutes image of pain?
in which context? The Hartman evidence or something?
Well, we think this is presupposed on the idea of affective connection, because it's not just saying this
I
is
guess
a bad.
then let me interrupt that to say then, like, what is not affective? Like, what policy or even a policy app or any app that describes any form of violence that must be permitted is not
Our
affective?
argument is not that affect is not an inevitable thing, but the way that the app is framed affect is a violent way. A couple of reasons for this. One, your notion of affective commonality builds itself on a common experience of loneliness, i.e. the coherence by which people know each other's experience. You have a common emotional resonance. We say that that's bad, because
Why?
there should be forms of, our collection evidence is fantastically specific to the app. I'm pretty sure it has literally the plain text in the card. It says the fantasies of the common over affect is bad.
So this is
because when you
the
say-
context of white liberals, I guess my question
it's
is,
really
why is
not.
it-
It's making a larger structural claim about the way that affect works in sort of emotional resonance.
This
This
literally is
is-
about compassionate liberalism and the way that white people get off on this. My question to you is, how is this relevant
That's a
to the way?
contextualized
Yes, no,
example
it's
of the part,
definitely
it's
more
not
than
just
that.
about white liberalism.
Like when the 1AC Crossix says that the affective commonness is black and native people bonding together over their affective relationality over a common loneliness, that assumes that they can understand each other's pain. The attempt to
Actually,
do that
I have a
in the
question. Why
comments
does
is
it
fine.
assume, why does affective resonance assume understanding?
Our argument is that it's not okay. Even if he's not understanding, as in I perfectly understand someone's pain, you have to make their pain coherent to know
No,
that they
why?
have the comments.
Why does affect require
Because then
coherence?
then your argument about generating the comments just means you vote neg on presumption. But B, we've made an argument about how affect functions now, which means there's a uniqueness claim about how the world reads performativity that you have to answer.
Sure, and then I guess the last argument is this kind of question about this Johnson evidence. It talks about filial concept. Actually, I got 5 seconds. I'm good. Yeah. Ready? You said.
Okay, what time, bro?
Oh no,
I could not, no, I could not fight. The question is how much can I generate? I don't even know if I can generate anxiety about it. I've gotten in a car accident before, so like the threat of imminent death at that point is just like, just do it. Like, no, when you get into like the car, the second time I got into a car accident after my really serious from high school, as it was like, I saw it happening, I was like, this is it. Like, I felt,
here we go.
yeah, I felt total calm.
Here we go.
No, absolutely.
So that feeling is
Like,
oh, well.
yeah. Yeah. I felt, I was like, if this is the end, so be it. That's how I remember feeling in high school too, like at the very moment, like that I knew, I was like, wow, I'm about to be in like a horrendous accident, which I don't even remember very well. I remember being like, this is the end, so be it. Do I need water? No, I'm okay. I need a nap, to go home. To have the NDT be reasonable and have Eli on a separate day from campus. To graduate.
At this rate, we should just stop going to tournaments and just meet up for practice videos. It's like, it was like, we did like 5 times in 2 years.
We have hit each other, I think
It's
we
like
hit each other.
ridiculous amount.
We have hit each other like 5 times.
Yeah, and it's all in like 3 tournaments. It's just like.
Well, back in the
We hit it,
day,
where did we hit, no, I think it's like across 4.
computers at all, so-
Pitt,
CETA, and
CETA, and what?
Pitt here and
If you
CETA,
were
or
big,
Pitt, CETA, and
right,
here
you would
twice.
have to.
No, but we all met each other one time before.
Yeah.
Before Pitt, yeah.
Be like, read the card.
Yeah, so the first time we hit y'all, we were at, Barlow was in the back.
Where the hell is Anthony?
I remember that Shannara peeked in right before that room too.
Yeah. That was the first, we hit each other 5 times this year.
Well, this is the fifth, right?
Yeah, this is the 5th
Yeah.
one.
It's been
Who's
escalated.
gonna come back?
If there were more tournaments this year, we would just be matched like every round.
I don't think we've hit anyone more than we've hit shoot.
I don't think we've hit anyone else more than twice.
Yeah, y'all must really like.
That is weird. What's going on here?
We must perform opposite of each other all the time, or just around the same amount.
Or either or, because
Actually, this is the only time I've ever hit you and Elam, so it must be that we're almost always about the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, good times just texting each other because it makes you feel narrow.
I hit Kentucky BT a lot this year too. I think they're hilariously racist. They're like so explicit about how racist and fascist they are that it's almost like, wow, you were like so honest. Like the boldness to read a app that in the tag says we should violate individual autonomy. Like in the tag though, like it's not in the card, it's not underlined.
they're just not pretending.
But not even hiding it.
Yeah, at least in a way they're just straight like fuck individual rights. Like yesterday we were like, hey, what about like if indigenous people are alcoholics? Like, and they were like, yeah, they're responsible for getting other people sick then. And I was like, fuck, okay. Like shit, like
That kind of
just
stuff where you just like don't even know what to argue.
yeah,
How
I was
you
just
don't know where to start.
like right. I just wanted to be like.
stuff like that, or how you think your children are doing. I mean, there was like a good, like, 15 seconds when Tinkerbell was first born. Piggy was at a debate tournament. I was at home with her by myself. She had to be like 3 months old. And she started making these really weird noises, like after we had went to bed. But she slept. Tinkerbell refused to sleep for the first 9 months without being firmly attached to my bed. So we went to bed, turned off the lights, and she started sounding like a little demon. I had to get out of bed and turn the damn lights on. I'm not playing with you. Seriously, y'all laughing in the room. When I tell you I got out of that bed and turned the overhead lights on to look at her.
Not even the nightstand. Like
I was like, did I have a demon baby? Okay, sorry. Demon babies.
It's gonna be
Is this on the
page, the order, in the words of NDT, it'll be case.
You should keep mocking this man. You know what? You kind of deserve it though. I remember I debated you one time. It was terrible. There was like 3 flows, and you're like, it'll be the F.
Exactly.
And I was like, what?
Exactly.
And you would still do line by line.
That's petty. That's petty. That's ultra petty. Let's go.
You should vote affirmative to read the resolution as a zone of affective comments and affective of loneliness. We have 2 impact arguments. I don't think nature first is sexual relation, the flesh way in which, I got one, because both the mantra that roots indigeneity and syntactic that works the way in which the linguistic interpretations of the resolution, i.e. the top of the part of the one you see both, produces decaying worlds before people even enter into debate. The way in which Barbara Kincher becomes the constitutive factor that produces the concept of the one and I, B is the shatterment. The way in which native as the corporalization of both the state of nature, but the conceptualization of the body produces the settlement as a conceptual apparatus. The affirm is now reducible to a generic affirmation of poetics or poetry in general, but the ways in which poetics is a necessary project to articulate way of being, formed with the spectrality of homeliness. Poesis as a praxis and a theoretical orientations and affective comments of loneliness which occurred in the wake of genocide and slavery. This has a few implications. A is native of black women's labor. The home is a site overdetermined by the symbolic order of whiteness and femininity, which structures the home not only as a site defined in contradiction through and violence of black and native black women, but also situates it on forms of white cis or hetero kinship, rather embrace homelessness as the refusal of native and black women to produce the domestic affirmation of native and black kinship structures, which are never considered to be kinship, but still contain the possibility of an affective commonality at the structural level, which can create networks of refusal that only knocks out spectral zones of survivance that can dodge the constant intrusion of gratuitous violence in a native and black women's faces, but also creates a method to produce care that isn't parasitic upon them. A. B is re-theorized as relationality. Relationality often becomes trapped within the synchronous presence of the flesh, which can only be understood through intimacy or love, is trapped within a metaphysical presence and must constantly make a demand upon an other to recognize you or perform language. Spectral homeliness, in contrast, traces how relationality becomes possible in absence and loneliness. Now, intimacy and love might be found within the ghosts of who have gone before and understand care not as labor, but the absence of labor, mutual constituent refusal to labor like Belcourt. You should ask how in poetics of becoming might allow people to think of how care not only is laborious, but also mutual undoing, which is a majority framing thesis argument, the way in which the concept of the home is produced before people enter or conceptually do it. This is the way the top part of the topic, or when you see the way in which single payer collective notion of coming together as a nation is the production of those political futures that have been impact turned above the first piece of apartment evidence. Give you a few thesis level questions. First is our model debate. The affirmative must offer a method of resolving some impact. The negative must articulate why that method is bad. This is good for a couple of reasons. First is debate is inevitably structurally violent. Balance when lost to the economy debate necessitate violent neoliberal tactics, but there are structural requirements not only due to go to the NDT, but debate programs which necessitate participation rather than offer intimacies for evaluation. Debate can be a site for method testing. B is competition incentivizes testing. Testing should actually keep as well. Testing would bring violent assumptions or methods outside debate. People have bad ideas. They need to be tested, which is our thesis evidence. However, they assume the point of the affirmative is to elicit the politics of care from the negative. This is foundationally wrong. There's a couple reasons. First is negating is and questioning is not care. Care is not a question of simply asking questions or negating or having to test the method of the affirmative. This is a literally structural aspect of what it means to debate, but rather care is constitutive. Not only would they have to want to care for Nico, but Nico would have to want that care. Care is the constitutive of bidirectional practice, which attempts to alleviate the loneliness or suffering of the one who is wounded. Our theorization places no burden on them outside the structural requirement of debate. They win this link argument, they have to
describe what the distinction is between the individual and the personal. There's no explanation of what a pain narrative is in cross-sex other than it explains violence. This never, even in the context of a structural and analytic, would still link to this, which means it's a question of the context of the debate, not the affirmative. Our theorization places no burden. The theory of care makes every debate psychologically violent, makes our force of emotion able for performance judge our force to reduce intimacies to a neo-level logic of risk calculus for ballot application. B is problems are co-constituent. Genocide and slavery are not separate, just paradoxical structures, but the way in which they constitute each other and form each other. At the very minimum, it's not possible to abolish one without abolishing the other. Thus, if you were caring, you wouldn't even be caring for just Nico, but for yourself as well. The attempted disentangle these systems of violence from each other not only corrupts the way in which they understand analysis and intensive violence as it destroys the possibility of consensual red-black nationality, which is the kind of majority of the argument. We have not forced you to care. There's not a cross-sex moment that says you are forced to labor or produce anything for the affirmative, but that the affirmative has a method that is good, i.e. all the arguments about loneliness. This is not a commonality of experience in the same thing that Native and red people are the same, right? The way in which that relates to it, but the way the superstructure, i.e. genocide and slavery, co-constitute to produce narratives of care or constituent relationships that produce that systems, which means there's not a link to this argument, any real warranted example of the presumption argument. This evidence indicates that there's no reason why a ballot, you should frame the ballot twofold. First, it's a libidinal investment in particular modes of politics, i.e. testing which strategy relates to other people, relationality, or argument is not all relationality and good, i.e. coming together as a valuable relationality is an inevitable part of discussions, right? The way in which affects co-constitute different people in relation, the way in which they place certain people above others, the way in which woundedness. This is also the basic level question at the end of the 1AC, i.e. Nico is not asking for a cure. He is not asking for his wounds to be healed, not a therapist or any of these conceptualizations. That's the point of self-care, is in the instance of how does Nico relate to these conceptualizations? Does he attempt to overcome himself, expunge the conceptualization, which means you should understand the value of interpreting the resolution in new ways as valuable in itself. This is the poesis, the creating of new meanings that is conceptually valuable, because the way in which debate operates is the way we understand the topic, i.e. the way in which it can be understood as a collective coming together. Single payer for the nation is the constituent that is both parasitic upon black and native women's labor, i.e. the conceptual, the home, the role, the affirmative is to disoccupy that figure, which is the argument, the parameters argument. There's not our framework argument which resolves the majority of this evidence. This just indicates that there's no way to distinguish because there's multiple forms of care. Care in this instance would be it's mixing burdens. The affirmative is not care good as an advocacy statement, but a way to interpret the resolution. There is ways to define that, i.e. we have defined how we should come to understand the topic, the way that constitutes, the way in which produces decaying worlds, which is a negatable thing. You could have an interpretation of what those words mean in your context, or a differential praxis that negates poesis as a method that is not based on care, or you telling Nico or me how to do things, or care for us, the victimization, or they say it leads to a matrix of judgment. There's no internal link of how their interpretation resolves it, because never you have to create a matrix of what is good or bad. The victimization about affective commonality. This evidence is about white women repurposing a common collective coming together through affective sentimentalism. This is the cross-sex of the 1AC when you ask who is in the we. Our argument is not that I come together with Nico for an affective commons of loneliness, or that there is a collective becoming, but the way in which superstructures over-determine it. There's also not an example of what this means in the context. What is a pain narrative? And you've also, this holds a Nico culpable for the way in which white people reinterpret his words, which is a double turn with both your Hartman evidence and the majority of the arguments. There's also no contextualization of what context affectual liberalism would a structuralism argument inevitably do this, the way in which Hartman describes the way in which people are forced to care. That itself is a affective commonality, or arguments the commons inevitably exist, but it doesn't always have to be a coming together, i.e. the way in which loneliness can be a constituent factor. This is a Belcourt argument at the bottom of the 1AC, that the homelessness itself is not a kind of universalization of argument. The net benefit to this argument is the creation of red-black coalitions, which is the relationality argument. The relationality is the co-constitutive, which is our argument. Debate is not a home, but it is work, which is the constitutive argument. The way in which ballots operates, the Belcourt evidence about the black man. This evidence is about a poem about Michael Brown. This is not descriptive of the affirmative. We have said the word a black man was seen on Oxford. A is not a way in which this evidence describes the visceral description of Michael Brown's autopsy, but instead a way in which structurals constituted, i.e. the example when we cite Christina Sharp to say that anti-blackness is a total climate that exceeds individual particular persons, which is the kind of basic level questions, but this also presumes that Native people cannot talk about the way in which anti-blackness and settler colonialism
clues are co-constituent of the net benefits, that coalition's argument that was done, Bob, which is the thesis argument. There's also no warrant to this argument in the process other than you talked about a person that's not philic because it's a relational how violence works. They say they make this argument about attachment to psychic life. This evidence doesn't have a warrant for it. It just says Aaron's evidence just says that the non-black relationality is not a relationship. Yes, we have said the normative gaze of the white man, but that is not to say that it's a theory of whiteness, i.e. deviancy, but that the way in which white gaze operationalizes itself produces concepts of error in anti-blackness and cellular colonialism, but also all of our evidence problematizes the non-black relationality because it assumes a dialectical human, non-human, which our evidence or poetry indicates is inexplanatory. Understand the way in which nativeness becomes corporalized as the body, the conceptual frame argument about the which card is this? What's the second? The Oliver. This evidence A is impact turned by the majority of arguments. It's not a constituent investments in pain. This is the bottom of the 1AC, i.e. when Nico says he's not romanticizing pain. It's not, yeah. Okay, ready to go? Yeah. Okay, is there anything that comes after this disoccupation of the home? Because you said you're not an affective commonality. The bottom part of the Belcourt card you read in the 1AC says, towards a new future, a new collectivity. What does that new collectivity look like if it's not the home?
Yeah, so a couple things here. One, we think that the majority of the 1AC is able to articulate kind of what refusing homelessness means. I think the part of the 2AC that's talking about the refusal of black and native women to produce the labor that constitutes home in a way that maps out zones in which care is thought of not as a laborious process, but rather a process of
If it's not coming together over something that you can understand, what are the
I did not say that, but okay.
Okay, well, I think there's large parts of 2AC answering the affect argument about how you don't have to understand,
Sure.
but you can relate to absence. If it doesn't relate to present things or merely absent things.
I don't know what you just said.
That was your argument that says we no link the affect argument because it's a relationality, not a demand on the other, but a love for absence.
Okay, I can actually answer this question. Our evidence argument was in contextual, the way in which your evidence says that affective commonality is bad because it, A, creates a kind of universal subject that everyone experiences things the same way, the way in which white women are able to kind of use images of suffering to consolidate their ethical subjectivity. Belcourt's arguments about affective commons of loneliness is not that everyone comes together around a specific articulation of sadness, right? That everyone is sad in the right way or sad in the same way, but the way in which superstructures of colonialism and
Well, then how do they come together?
make it such that native and black people are
Well, then
mutually
how do they
independent.
come together and care for each other?
How do they come together and care for each other? That'd be a Nico question.
So, a couple things here. One, I think that the articulation of care is not a labor, but rather a constant refusal of labor and an unbecoming of the stress of labor on the body is a different as a re-theorization of care that I think is actually in line and perhaps a practical moment of your Hartman evidence.
I'm asking, how is that a collectivity? I understand you refuse
Sure.
labor.
How is
Your cards are about a new collectivity. What does that look like?
Okay, yeah, so two things here. The first is that we're talking about the ways in which in the wake of genocide and slavery, there is a common condition of brokenness that exists between black and native people.
I thought you said there is no common experience of sadness and loneliness.
The
There's a
distinction between the idea that we all, like Kojak and Leonardi, experience this commonality, like their universal subject, and the people who are experiencing brokenness of being just blackness and native people.
You make this argument that forms, sorry, let me just find where it is, that if their things are co-constitutive, then Gabby caring for herself would also be a form of caring for indigeneity. If this is true, how do you distinguish the poesis of the app and the poesis of the neg?
Couple things here, I guess. One, I don't think the negative 1 in C is poesis.
Why?
So poesis implies a kind of poetic move to language that grapples with things in a unique way. Second of all, it asks to call
What's
something.
poetic then?
What is poetic?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple things here. One, do you want for
Yes,
cool.
Yeah, I'm starting back.
Cool. Yeah, so I think one, obviously, like a rigid and structural definition of poetics is potentially violent, but secondly, we think that it allows a way in which language is utilized to create something new. This is the definition that Jacob gives of poesis, that the way that the play with metaphor and signification is able to grapple with violences and create a grammar that can grapple with something that is non-grammatical.
Also, the app isn't just poetics good.
Yeah, also important. The app is not just poetics
So
are good.
your parameters are good.
done.
In that context.
We just need to be quicker. We don't way too caught up with the stuff on the
community pressure.
also next to wherever you close the, yeah. I will say, I'm gonna start with the Hartman evidence if that helps. Are you all good?
Mm-hmm.
Black women's labor is necessary for the unacknowledged by the world. Whenever she goes, she is the mother meant for the care, to care for both her own children and those that aren't her own as a way of sustaining her family. She gets Harvey gets the example of how black women as domestics, where she works in the White Household, those families to care for the children in order to earn money to care for her own. She's blamed as investing time from her family and capitulating the aid practice by caring for non-black children. Yet she was docked pay by those families she worked for every time she had to leave to care for her own children. She doesn't get a break from her physical, psychological, and emotional labor needed to care for herself, those, and others. Wherever she goes, she is always already the caretaker. This is why people have no barriers to black women, because they are infinitely open. NDT, emotional receptacles for your problems, questions, complaints, which is why white people don't think twice before touching black women's hair. Why black women start Me Too movements, but non-black women blow up their feet asking for their own pain to be listened to along with and recognize their own. Or why black girls are never allowed to be innocent or vulnerable, because they have already been accelerated into marriedom or adulthood. Because they're black women, this means that they are always already mature enough to take care of you, so they don't get to be vulnerable. They don't get to say no, don't get to ignore your pain. This is why we get up from this is why we get up to answer your call at 3 a.m. call after we finish our night, just because if we say no or if we say no, we do not get to be we do not get reciprocal care, because the care for us is conditional. So we have to extend ourselves and break our back to ensure that we have the minute chance of somehow being there for you, you somehow being there for us one day when we need it, which means that negation of black women is never negation by black women is never a choice or a safe choice, because she is structurally situated to always say yes to communities, to comments, or when she does decide to negate it, she is wholly abandoned and told she doesn't care or is criminalized for criminalizing those in her community, which is why you can view this as effectively as a pick out of the form of their debate, not the content. It's not that they don't get the app, but they don't get to present the scene to pay moodiness or demand for effective relationality in front of black women. Well, there be judges or debaters, which means they can cover this particular or app 98% of the time, but this is not one of them at all. So it's a question of good faith, because they have an entirely different app, but they only choose to read this one in front of black women this far. I hate Coco and Brooke and Nina and Shannara and other black judges in the back of the room, in the room, which is how the app is strategically deployed against black women out as a reason to prefer this interpretation of how they create comments, i.e. outside of forcing the conversations on black women, because they preclude black women from saying no or letting them approach on their own terms, which is a net benefit to them changing the form of debating, i.e. consent, because outside of these forced conversations allows black women to come to the comments as they are or as they want to. They say no bright line, but there's a difference between the apps and the policy apps that discuss things like new or single payer or whatever the fuck they do, because those are forms of public problems that universally affect, whereas the app intimate politics of a common and affective resonant with poetry, and the scenes of pain in the poetry is a private one, and the private is where black women are made to labor. They say Hartman is a double term with the Fleischman evidence, so unappropriated affect. Rooney will get to the card, but I'll answer the turn here. Holding the app accountable doesn't make Nico responsible for white people, and it clearly doesn't make Nico a black woman, which is who Hartman is fucking talking about. The app is responsible for the form and method they use particularly because they have a level of control of the labor and the labor reception that the reception that black women lack. They say they don't try to force black women to care or want to care, but it's not about their intentions, but how the world already has shaped these interactions and positioning of labor, meaning that it is their responsibility to consciously comport themselves given this. Even if you think they are completely right and that black women should have to engage with the app, you still give me the fucking ballot, because the labor shouldn't have to be performed for free. This is a unique frame of the ballot as statement. This isn't about the ballot being necessary to personally affirm black women, because this isn't a typical debate. In other debates, intellectual labor is reciprocal and it's competitive, but the frame for which they set up this debate is that black women have to do double work and perform both emotional and academic labor for the app's catharsis or sounding board to present the theories. They say black women debate are structurally behind. They set black women debate are structurally behind in this debate by doubling their labor, because non-black women are policed into the roles of labor, so they can respond to the app however the fuck they want without the mandate of emotional receptiveness or healing. But black women cannot, because of their positioning within society. So this debate is not neutral. You should just use your ballot to structurally adjust the debate to account for the uneven distribution of labor here that other debates don't have to have. Now I'm gonna go. Rudy will answer the Fleischman turn. I'm gonna go to the parameters argument. You can evaluate this argument before anything else in the debate, because it's a part question of how you should inevitably inform your ballot in the first place. The app has provided a method with no way of evaluating it. They just say that being for and with spectralities of loneliness and an aspect of commons is a good way of being, but what does that mean in the context of the ballot in the form of debate? Parameters isn't about evaluating performance, it's about using standards to evaluate methods, because without an interpretation of delineating between methods, you inevitably turn to evaluating performativity to decide a tiebreaker of the ballot without a metric. The app uniquely causes that arbitrary performance metric that lapses and defines in CX. I asked them what affirming homelessness and moodiness looks like, and they said it could be anything, which means that you have no way of evaluating whether they have performed it or not, or if we have performed it, or all of y'all have performed it other than Kozak Leonardi, of course, which means the ballot is not necessary necessary for the project's continuance of the ballot doesn't determine who performs it or when they do so. They have not provided a bright line for what counts as the creation of a commons or not, or how to choose between different forms of them, which just means that there's an arbitrary dissent because you become the determinant of who's performed or embodied affective loneliness well enough. The act might have in the performance of it, but how do you then understand other forms of it if all others don't look like or mirror the presentation of the app, i.e. poetics? There's an essentialism dissad because if their method in the commons looks and is different methods of the commons looks and are expressed differently, but the only example they give is the app, then they become the litmus test for spectacularization through which all other performances of embodiments to affirming loneliness is compared to, and that you always determine if someone is performing it well enough based on how much it looked like or felt like the one they see, or whether or not you felt the same way when you encountered another person's affirmation as you did when you encountered the poetics of the app. This affirmation can be anything, and their model of debate is when any time they hit another black person or native person on the neck, the judge has to determine which member of the commons performed or embodied the method good enough, which is inherently violent because the model sets up debate as a mirror of the outside world, where black debaters hitting them especially, because the world already presumes against black people before they open their mouths, before they speak or act, and the app brings that de facto presumption into round by saying the method is good, we won't tell you how to evaluate them, so just vote app because we presented it first and are the only ones that give you a basis of what it looks like, which means they make debate a violent mirror of the world, since black debaters can't live up to the preset standards that don't allow them the chance to compete with the app in the first place, which is also a dissent to their idea of forming a commons, because the black people are de facto excluded from the commons or have the lesser than commons before they ever encounter the app. Now there's an arbitrator dissent because judges can never really last back into arbitrary distinctions of which black or native person is better, and that will always rely on a sort of sheer familiarity of who is least distant from them, or their internalized ideal of a normalized body, which inevitably leads to the disproportionate loss of queer, trans, disabled, etc. black and native debaters that deviate further than the acceptable norm, which is a hierarchy dissent, because it means there's always going to be a hierarchy within these forms of commons. Now they give no particular definition of poetics or affective loneliness, and that it could be anything. So ask yourself, when one affective loneliness or commons is antithetical to the well-being of someone else's, i.e. forms of affective commons bonding over loneliness that can be held seen in churches, but those churches are excluded to gay and trans, native, and black people. They have no definition of a commons, or how we know that these commons are inherently safe without a way of litmus checking or checking their methodologies or checking the form and content of the commons. You have to air neg on fear because there's only a chance that these commons can be violent, which means you should not just vote neg, you should not just vote app to trust them, you should err on the side of skepticism. There's also a giant presumption question, because if anything can be a formation of commons or affirming loneliness, if not everyone's loneliness knows the same. Actually, Rooney's gonna get to that presumption question. Okay. They have provided you no way of delineating this, but I'm gonna make a presumptive double bind here, that if they come up here in the 1AR and try to re-articulate the app and give you a clear-cut definition of what is or isn't forming in the commons, who isn't in the commons, or what is or isn't performing of loneliness, they create a litmus test for who is or isn't properly performing it, which leads to a self-hate dissent where black people and native people internalize the app, telling them that they aren't embodying it properly enough, haven't performed poesis or whatever it is they need correctly enough, which leads to a violent policing of people within and outside of the commons, which causes that kind of exclusivity that prevents the commons from happening in the first place. All of these dissents should inform a larger view of the ballot, that you do not have the jurisdiction to vote for the app, even if on face you think it can be a good idea, because with no objective metric or way of telling which black debater or a native debater can embody it better, you inevitably lapse back into psychological investments of who can communicate properly or on a more coherent register, which is usually non-disabled, queer, or women debaters, and the result is usually making arbitrary distinctions of who you like better, meaning there will always be black debaters that de facto lose simply because they are not the app, and the app is the only example they give. They force your ballot to be an evaluation of who performed better, which means your ballot will always be violently slanted to make a judgment on someone not bodily performing well enough, which disproportionately hurts the embodies, which is why you should vote neg on a needing a method and a metric for determining it. And I'm going to go to the errant evidence on the white gaze. Their only argument here was that they talk about anti-blackness and whiteness, but this isn't the argument, it's a rhetorical link because of their Oxford excerpt, and the Cornell Woodson evidence talks about the structuring of the world-forming institutions of anti-blackness, but then flinch away from the theory or totality of it when they use the white gaze. This identification of the white gaze is a liberal rhetorical move to mystify the way anti-blackness works by rhetorically contextualizing it as being a problem with whiteness versus black, as being a problem with a deviation from whiteness instead of a deviation away from blackness as the foundation of your understanding of body, which means that they kind of created complacency or benignness to non-black people. They say that any non-black person can be trusted because they are not the white gaze and the white master, which is what you really have to look out for, which means that they net make it work for black people and black survival strategies and health, because they tell black people to put their guard down around non-black people, which is how black people get killed by non-black police, etc.
You have progressive?
Yeah.
What constitutes a delineation?
What do you mean?
Your parameters argument, do we have delineation between what is what?
A delineation, a distinction, one thing is not another.
So in that instance, wait, just saying like abstractly, this is what is not affective commons of loneliness, right?
It's not saying, like you can say this is affective commonness and you can point to 5 other things, and say that is not, but you have to have a reason why that is not the same thing, right?
Okay, so in that instance, can you give me an example?
Like, you
of a
can tell me
method
what it's
and then-
not, but you have to tell me how you determine it's
Okay,
not.
in that instance, can you give me an example of what an advocacy would look like or what a delineation is? Because I'm kind of confused on that.
Well, I don't know, because if your method can be anything, I
So
don't
I'm
actually
just
know what that
like
would
an
look like.
example of what would meet your standard, right?
Right, so like an app that's like, I'll contextualize it like policy-wise, because
Nah,
I don't
can you
have
make
like
that?
a K app.
Yeah.
Sure, some people's apps is like, we need to have like utopic images injected into the academy. They give you a definition of what utopia is or what it's in opposition to, and then,
But in that instance, utopia could also be many things, right? It's not based on the.
well, that's the
content,
thing, right? They have a definition of what utopia is in this instance. If you had just given me a definition of yes or no, this is what affect is, instead of saying there are
Yeah.
multiple ways of forming
You
the
said it's
community,
a
multiple
basis of
forms of that.
relationality.
No, you did not say. You said poesis is one example of it. That's a different thing.
What?
No, we didn't, but okay, cool.
Yeah,
That
you
affect,
did.
the answer for affect and poesis were different questions, right?
Okay.
So
It's
I
a
don't know why
question.
you're interchanging
Your
those
method,
answers.
at least the way that we understood it, the way you wrote it down on this piece of paper, is that you,
And then
what is it, affirm the
process.
resolution through
Okay.
creating an
What's
affective
the-
commons of loneliness. You didn't tell us what it means to like affirm loneliness or
What's
create
the
an affective
distinction
commons.
between public and private?
Right.
Focusing on private violence forces labor, but public violence doesn't.
Okay, so
So say the app was like, settler points in the structure causes individual violence. How does that not force you to labor?
what do you mean?
Right, you said it doesn't lead to other apps because they're about public issues. But the app is intimate, and so it forces you to care. Why?
Right. Well, because of the framing of the app, first of all, is that you said you need an affective resonance for these commons. We say when you have affective relationality.
Why does affect require resonance?
Why?
Yeah, where do we say resonance? That seems to be.
CX of the 1AC, when we
Why is
ask you how other
relationality
people
resonance?
relate, you say there's an affective resonance. Those are your own words,
Well,
we wrote them down.
Fair enough. In that instance, how is structural claims not affective?
Because the structural claims don't rely on affective or
How?
commonality.
Because if you speak it into existence.
Like,
it
I don't
becomes
think you're gonna
affective,
no
right?
link this, especially when you say your method is
You made a
affect.
distinction.
Yes.
So why is that distinction true?
The distinction between public, private, and affect.
Yeah, like why is structuralism solely public and not
Right.
private?
Like, that was kind of what you asked us in CX of the 1 and C. Like, there's gonna be an inevitability to some things, but there are obviously standards or more metrics where you force a higher confrontation than others, and we're saying that this is a particularly bad one.
Okay, you ready to go?
I guess just right after it.
Are there cards we have?
No.
Oh, okay.
We're all good to go? Okay. You should vote not aft. You should be voting negative. It's not a valuing debate because before you walk in, you just don't vote at all, which is right. Just a presumption vote. It's a vote for the status quo. Judges should not presume that if nothing happens, you automatically just vote aft. You should vote not aft unless you should not vote aft unless they've articulated a reason to do so. The negative is not engaged with. Their only answer to the presumption argument was that poesis is a form of creation of a new grammar by which to understand the world. There is no reason why the negative hasn't also articulated this in our structural analysis by the way the gender operates intertwined with the aft in the first place. If their argument poesis is not simply that they're reading poems, which is their answer in cross-ex, but a sort of form of relationality and a form of making new play with metaphors and creating new sort of semantic distinction between things, and it means that intellectual labor of the negative always itself already was poesis, which means that it places you at the arbiter of what forms of poesis are better, which links to all the offense that Gabby did in the 2NC, but there's a catharsis. This said you can divorce endorsements of the aft self-care from giving the aft a ballot. The judges should not be the reference to what is good as a personal method of self-care. This links to the 2NC argument that the negative could also be self-care in a form of caring for Gabby as a form of caring for herself. If the ballot isn't necessary to create the conditions of the aft self-care, there's no reason to vote after their method to occur in the first place outside of articulating which forms of self-care are better. If it's necessary to pass a grade on forms of self-care, i.e. you have articulated self-care well enough or not well enough, therefore you get the W or the L. This is inevitably a violent framing of debate where debaters invest in the ballot as a release of a cathartic release where we learn to tie our versions of self-care and resistance to whether or not we get a W or an L. This internal link turns their argument of the ballot being a libidinal investment because they invest in the coherence of their sort of judging of the judge as a condition by which self-care happens. If self-care can happen absent the ballot, it means you can vote negative and still think that the ask for self-caring or not asking for healing or loving the wounding is something that is good, but it just doesn't need the ballot because the internal link turns every argument about libidinal investment in debate because if they are right, the debate is violent. Because they invest less than the conditions of debate in that form of violence as to appropriating or saying that the act was good enough for self-care to happen. If the ballot's not necessary, then self-care happens absent the ballot, then the ballot is bad. This internal link turns their impacts, but is a net benefit to voting negative or interpretation debate because the ballot should not be represented as a thing that enables individual self-orientation to something oriented towards different strategies to prove the app, which means that this form of argument grades the app, which internally turns our argument about creating a common homeliness, a form of being together in the void of an unasked question, because it means that the ballot houses the app and makes it communal, i.e. not lonely, by affirming its relationship as a goodness or a good object, which brings it back into the house in the first place by articulating a form of labor by the judges that says that you have labored well enough in the first place. Now I'll go to the affect turn that they have conceded. There is literal explanation be that as being not contradictory about the 2AC and crosses. They have no way to change a grammar of suffering, and there no collectivity or harmony evidence says black women cannot be disimbricated and symbolically from images of the home and domesticity by black and native people because they are fixed as constantly producing and being productive for the world even outside of the home, which is why it confounds the very distinction between private and public, which is the argument that Gabby's making. Their argument is literally just object fiat, i.e. that people will think better and engage in forms of care that are based outside the home. If they can see the argument of libido investments, it means that they can't simply will that away. There's no reason you can do that. Their form of care is a form of refusing labor, which ignores the unique positionality of black women as being scripted as more laboring than other black men, i.e. black men, black men and native people. They refuse all forms of labor and work towards the world, i.e. when the 2AC says homelessness is a form of collectivity necessarily outside the home, where people don't have to labor. It means that native people don't have to labor in their relationship to black women, which means they never have an incentive to improve themselves in the way that they are violent to black women in the first place, which ignores that. They also conceded that they've attached affective interconnectedness as the reason to vote app, i.e. that their poetic intervention through poiesis redirects labor towards an affective intimacy with each other. That links to our arguments on affective labor, begs the question who gets to be seen as properly lonely, properly sad or not. This is the way that black women who are not seen as being sad, as being lonely, as being depressed, but are scripted as being angry, being upset, being irrational, being out of place. They don't get the very vulnerability of being lonely in this comments, because their affective labor is always scripted before they enter it. When you see cross-section of the affective comments is a common bonding, and rhetoric will read common brokenness relies on the conception of affective labor, i.e. the manipulation of bodily power and rhetoric to reveal your message to other black and native people in a way that conform to collectivity. That is proven in their last piece of poem from the Felcourt evidence. It says that sharing the feeling of being lonely can create new forms of collectivity. It says it's an affective comment through recognizing the world isn't quite white, that can constitute new worlds on the horizon over a mutual form of care, that common brokenness, as the 2AC said. They then try to argue it's not a relationship of labor or common experience, say that people bond over a common brokenness under white supremacy. We've impact turned that argument and intervened at this very level of understanding a common brokenness, which understands a common experience of loss, which is problematic. The next argument that they make is literally a contradiction to the above argument. They say they don't need to understand people to be together. Then presumption, there is no comments. All relationality is based on some way of making the other noble. It literally makes no sense. How is it a form of relationality or care over loneliness if you don't know when people are lonely or not? It means the app does nothing at all and creates no relationality because they have no way of knowing if the people you're in common with are lonely in the first place. It's which it is literally a double turn. The basis for the affective kinships are purely based on people's ability to live with the normal standards of affective relationality. The way they can represent their forms of sadness to other people. Those people seem less normative, like queer, trans, or the same people will always be offbeat and not lonely enough, or simply being sort of narcissistic, like the script of the welfare queen that says that black women, the protection of their community and their collectivity already relies on privileging a certain affect, because black women are already conscripted as wasting their resources in terms of form of care, which impacts the formation of a new collectivity, because the people that engage with this are those who meet certain normative standards of community. We see that build their new collectivity by centralizing those who are able to meet proper standards of affect. Their Fleischman evidence, I'll go to here. Affect as the basis for relationality of commons is back because they connect people to the sense of belonging. They say affect is inevitable. Yes, it's inevitable that people relate to each other. Our argument is that you have to relate to each other based on the affective relationship of commonality in loneliness or brokenness. If not, vote negative on presumption. That was above. There's an affective investment dissent to this. So Fleischman evidence says basing affect as a condition for commonality is back to bracket structural antagonism, but finding a form of vague belonging. People rely on conventional expectations for affective insurances, like the text of the vague belonging, some form of alleviation for antagonism and recognition by the other. This form of common brokenness is bad. Yes, the African white women, the cart says the app inevitably collapses into coercive identification in the forms of black homelessness, i.e. People come to enjoy each other's pain and brokenness becomes a spectacle to be circulated, or they try or give native people the ability to read black women's pain and see their pain is somewhat similar to the way that native people, which means they don't have to do the extra work to labor that, which is impacted above, which means the encouragement of emotions becomes a cathartic release that is satisfactory enough. They never have to engage in the hard work of actually doing labor and changing material structures, i.e. how people relate to each other, which means that for sort of vague belonging of the app, that vagueness we have impact on because it means that people never do the work to resolve why they're violent to black women in the first place.
Cool. 6:15. Starting now.
the top and are grappling with the argument Jim makes into a C, which is your balance with minimal investment in a praxis, which can do something in black and native women debate a structurally violent competition, allows to test methods grappling violence. This goes conceded their arguments all assume the process falls back into a general societal superstructure generally makes all of their dissets not unique, but it also doesn't do shit for native and black women. If you get a way in which the native can resolve violence against native and black women, you should vote affirmative. The next argument I go over here is black women's labor fights away to rather where our argument is that this is why our articulation of care is particularly important. Is a refusal to do that labor is the only way in which was able to the refusal to make that demand upon black women to do that labor was the only method of care which provides a possibility of creating the type of industries they say never gonna break that their amply open argument is yes, this is why this is the organization of care is particularly important. The next argument is this type of model debate. They say if we do they have this argument that people get widely made into two arguments here. Is the one you should refuse to pick is a way in which this type of argumentation is scripted and destroys the possibility of black coalitions and commonality between them. That'll be later down the next argument. The behavior is that they do not get care, but the argument is that this should be situated within a particular advocacy about how we relate to each other and how we theorize care. Yes, their argument is this is object field. Our argument is that we have to create modes of how we should all create ethics and modes of relating to each other, and these variables should be tested. This is our argument about how we should do this. They say that we should be against black women judges. Our argument is that this is no. We read this against two white women from Harvard and a panel of 3 judges. This is an asinine argument. The next argument here is that this is the difference public private. They already made a claim that the division between public and private sphere is fundamentally violent. The restriction is a contradictory move that is a flinch away from the gratuity of violence that destroys the difference. They have conceded the argument that experiential narratives are necessary to understand structural violence and vice versa. Every narrative of nuclear war is always a personal narrative, that they attempt to see it as such as how we distance ourselves from the way that we are constantly implicated by violence. The next argument here is down about each balance. Also, argument is twofold here. One is that we create a particular mode of relating and care. That means that we have a particular method. Second argument is that yes, if this is about how it's structurally violent, how it's structurally oriented, then all of your dissents are always non-unique because they are already operating within a particular mode of care that is intensify. Your attempt to say the affirmative can uniquely increase these forms of violence is one that disavows the gratuity of violence, that is not based on contingent practices, but rather articulates itself in a way that can only re-script a mystification of how violence functions. Argument here is that positioning this makes debate on this is the parameters argument. Couple responses here. First is that we have a particular interpretation of the resolution versus their interpretation. This would be a testing argument there. The second one is that you always generate something new and you have to negate that. You have conceded a model debate that says that is true. And 3 is that it is an orientation away from home. These are all definitions by which you would understand the distinction between the affirmative and a counter argument. The argument that they go for here is this type of you need a method of evaluating. This is just a impact framing argument I have already done above. Their next argument here is the essentialism detectable arguments here is that no, the affirmative is not a claim that we are as a particular performance of loneliness. I don't know what the fuck that means. Rather, it's an articulation about how we have a particular method of 1, understanding violence, 2, caring, and 3, understanding how we grapple with these things. This is the argument that Jacob extends to the time of spectralization when flesh and then shatterment about how these particular forms of violence can only be resolved through a poetic poesis that can generate a form of affirmation of being for and with the spectrality of homelessness that can, 1, get reform the way that black and native women constantly have to produce labor to create the home. It should articulate a refusal to constantly do that. And secondly, produce a narrativization of how we understand what it means to care and be with and for each other as a refusal to labor for the home in the world. This is the argument I think they're not grappling with. The next argument is that it gets black people out of the commons. This assumes 2 arguments. First is that it assumes a theorization of violence that is already intrinsic to their narratives. This is a non-unique 2 argument here is that the theorization of labor and care that we provide resolves this argument is why we provide a specific narrative that they say is a hierarchy to the commons. Just that this argument is asinine for 2 reasons. First, it assumes that the commonality we articulate is one that resolves this difference because it's a way of relating to and for each other that is understandable. Yes, we have already assumed the truth claims of pessimism. That yes, we will sometimes hurt each other. Our question is, what does that mean for how we relate to each other? This is the framing question of your ballot is, yes, your black and native people will always be participating in some degree of violence to and for each other, to and against each other because of the superstructure of violence. How do we exist with and for each other? This is the fundamental question of the affirmative that I think is not grappled with. The next argument is the comments could be violent. Yes, we have already assumed this. This is a question of how we grapple with the fact that we produce violence in the midst of commonality. The next argument is it creates a litmus test. The act is not a question about performing a method where you would vote for the team that best performs loneliness, but rather an articulation of a particular praxis about how we grapple with violence in the midst of a world that means we are always hurting each other. The next argument is that you don't have the jurisdiction. You should flag this jurisdiction argument and say way in which it imposes a governance form that is constantly that is aligned with the way in their Hartman evidence as well as their Flushman evidence articulates what it means to govern and control a body. The notion of legal jurisdiction is one that always prescribes the normative forms of humanity that ask you to take the position of the judge and arbitrator that is fundamentally violent in the context of this round. The next argument is a rhetorical flinch away from the white gaze argument. 2 answers. First is this is analysis of the way in which white masculinity produces and captures particular bodies in a certain way. It's not an argument that whiteness is the superstructure of all violence. This is distinctual. There can still be anti-black people of color, and this complain. These are not competing arguments or arguments about how to care for each other above all this. They say don't vote after you should vote. Some shit about like how the app could do this. A couple things here. The parameters are going to solve this. 2, this is just semantics. And 3, they need to have a negatory of the app. They have already, their pessimism claims turn all their disasters because it means that these things are already inherent within the world. There's no reason why the contingency of the affirmative could make them worse. The next argument is ballot is key. Argument that the ballot is key to solve these type of survival strategies. Rather, the ballot is an evaluation of a particular practice and method that we have put forth in a way of understanding the resolution in the world and orientation towards home and homelessness. And the next argument here is that enables the app to get the kind of ballot. This is the ballot makes a communality. Argument is not create communality. It is an evaluation mechanism. They say black women are structured, they can't get away from the word. Argument is how do we grapple with labor in relation to this? They say that people will not labor for black women. Argument is that the problem is that people are making a demand for black women to constantly care and labor for them.
Questioning is not care.
Questioning is not care. They have considered that questioning and negating are not forms of care, but rather than care is a bi-directional and constitutive thing that requires consent on both sides. This argument goes away. The argument is centralization of a particular form of knowledge is not able to be resolved. This also their commonality, practice, true antagonism, and arguments are above.
You should vote not act on presumption. You should view voting as not evaluating the debate at all. Before you walk out, before you walk into a room, you just don't vote at all, which is registered as a presumption vote as a vote for the status quo. There's a catharsis which wasn't really grappling with coming out of the one year that we have impacted their argument about the ballot as a libidinal investment. This means that they libidinally invest in the ballot as creating the conditions of their self-care, i.e. that you vote out of their form of loving their wounds, happens to invest in the ballot as a release valve, where they getting the W amount to allowing self-care, or getting the L amount to not self-caring. This is a violent framing of debate, but we offer you a way out of this voting i.e. just negative judges should not be the reference of what self-care is as a praxis. Their only description is the app in the two 1ARs that the poesis is generating something new. You can see that the something new shouldn't be recognized with a ballot because it makes that new thing only valuable if you win, which means it's not better to vote negative to let the acts poesis happen untouched. That turns it conceded the double mind that if they go for their comments, it's not based on knowing each other. It means voting negative presumption, which they did in the 1AR. If you can't know who's lonely or not, then you can't create a commonality, which thinks that you don't know. They say their form of care is one in which black women don't have. Things they don't know. They say their form of care is. I'm gonna go for this argument briefly that Renee went for. That their form of care is one in which black women don't have to labor. This doesn't make any sense when we've indicted that their well-court evidence notion of a new collectivity is the basis for a new collectivity, affective interconnectedness as a reason to vote out by either their poetic intervention redirects labor towards affective intimacy with black women, where you let black women not labor. This links to our arguments on effective labor, which begs the question of who gets to be seen as properly lonely, properly sad, or not laboring at all. Hartman evidence says that labor is scripted on the black woman and enforced on the black woman whether she wants to or not. Whether they give black women permission or not to labor is something that black women do not have the choice to do at all, which is why they have to change the form, not the content, or what their desires are. If black women laboring or not, they have to structurally adjust their form, not their meaning. This is the way that black women are not seen as being sad, or as being lonely, as being depressed, but are scripted as just being angry, as being upset, or irrational. They don't get the vulnerability of being lonely in the comments because their affective labor is already scripted before they enter into it. This means that the act doesn't let black women to not labor, but keeps them outside of their comments because they can never understand black women as being lonely enough when they are conceded all of this framing, which means black women are not seen as being properly lonely, so they are forced to labor to help themselves or try to get into the comments. Their labor is always something that is always already scripted, which means after the forming of this always already arguing of the innate nature of black women scripting, they don't account for black women in the comments are necessarily fine, so you should err in that presumption. Now their only answer to the pick out of the form, right, not reading this in front of black women is that this was and it's bad because of the choice coalition, so you vote neg now because they have performatively proven the link, i.e. when black women can never say, i.e. why black women can never safely refuse or negate you or consent to or reject your community, because anytime she says this is a violence, this is violent to me, please change your form, she is told that to be rejected because she is somehow hurting the coalition, which means it's a bad faith argument that they allow black women to put down their labor or not consent, because whenever black women say that I'm putting down my labor, however, your labor is uniquely hurting me, your creation of comments, or your form of presenting this in front of me, or you're opening up, or you're removing this to me that I feel like I have to respond to, they are told that they are destroying coalitions and not actually caring about the community, which means that they can never account for black women's labor. All of this impact turns the formation of their communities. The people that engage in these affective kinships are those people with certain normative forms of community. Means building community by centralizing those who are able to meet their standards and precluding those that are not, which means voting negative, saying that you need to centralize how black women inject their labor within the way of the affirmative idea, because if you do not centralize the way black women inject their labor, that labor is always something that's always already scripted and forced onto black women, which is a solvency take out to the form of their community or the solvency of poesis in the first place. It turns their arguments about how the world creates subjectivity and community by forcing labor and all its work on black women, because it means they sacrifice they sacrifice black women's labor at the altar of reducing the altar of native and non-black women at the altar of native and non-black women community and community building. Now the parameters argument, it says the app doesn't just get to provide a method, they have to define in a way that one delineates it from others, and two, wait for the judge to evaluate whether the method has been done or not. We have flagged that these are particularly violent frames of debate in the context of community building with other black people and natives or minorities in debate, because they are always automatically lose before they open their mouth, which is just replicating the way always already imposed failure the world relegates them to. But now in debate ground, because the asterisk is to allow you to determine the delineation of methods, particularly when they phrase the method as always already as something that can always already be being done, i.e. the communication, i.e. the affective sharing of loneliness, and they don't have to provide one way of doing it. Poesis is just the model, the poesis is just their model of doing it. You don't have a way of delineating whether the alternative team's method is properly doing it or not. If it's not it's properly not doing it or not, which means you always lapse back into arbitrary distinctions of whose performance you like better, which is always going to be privileged on a sort of shared familiarity of which body you think is less deviant, which means it's always to inevitably privilege native bodies over black bodies or black men over black women, because they are the less deviant or more able to be communicable, or you affectively feel your way into their pain better. Now you not have the jurisdiction to evaluate this debate, so you vote negative. It means the seating your ballot. Their only argument was here that jurisdiction implies legal government. No, it's not legality, but instead that you are here in a role of judge, and their method forces you to evaluate this debate and perform that role violently and should be rejected via seating the ballot to not vote app. The ballot becomes a form of government they say is bad when you don't get to vote on methods if their method and calculates everything because they default then becomes evaluating bodies and your ballot signals who is better, more valuable, worthy, which is why you vote negative to reject that frame of the debate in the first and vote negative to debate reject that frame of the debate in the first place. If you cannot perfectly articulate to me at the end of the round what the app fucking is or how it works or what it does, then you just vote negative on presumption because at one, they have conceded that they don't have they say they don't materially have to form these communities. Communities are already happening between Native and brown people. Then if we win between Native and black people, if we win any diss to the way that they have formed the community or especially have presented or opened that community up in this round, then this means you vote negative on presumption because it's happening in this role. Or if or if they're
Formatively did the opposite of the app when Gabby says, I don't want to labor for you, and they said that fucks up coalitions.
yeah, they performatively did the opposite of the app, which means you should just have high solvency skepticism when they performatively say, when I say I don't want to labor for you, and they say that fucks up our coalitions if you tell us to do it outside of debate or not in front of you, which is why you should just air neg and grant me any leeway on this argument. They've also conceded that you should just manually adjust your ballot to vote for black women as recompensation for their labor, given that in these types of rounds specifically, they put the onus on black women as catharsis, not objectivity.
Cool. 332, starting now.
just making sure you're plugging in.
Nico's delineation in the one are what constitutes a poetics of affirmative comment comments of homelessness is the very should frame your decision. There's two examples. He said poesis is the creation of something new that made the secondary claim that it requires either for to be the creation of a home or homelessness. This should resolve the majority of the arguments because it delineates what the praxis is affirmative. It doesn't require you to arbitrate what constitutes self-care or who has performed it better because it's a question of a theoretical delineation of what constitutes home versus not home. This has a few implications. First is it means your pick does not resolve it because they have conceded there's no distinction between the public, the private, the structural, and experiential. Think through the logic of the argument in another context. Let's say the app was described in the way in which structures cause violence and then identified a solution to your logic would still cause you to negate them of what you did wrong, which means it does not really resolve your argument because the impact arguments in the two are not contextualized to intimacy or the way in relation arguments, which means this creates a basic level framing arguments that there's no uniqueness for their impacts. How does the pick resolve it? How do they conceptually do it? That we read a different app, that we read the phenomenology of genocide, it would still require labor in some context, but you have conceded that questioning and negation is not care, which means you not have it internally to your Hartman evidence because it's a question of iterative testing. This is the framework argument made in the one year. The firm has to firm a method in which you should frame your balance and your libido investments in a particular practice, which can do something for Black and Native women. If the Natives not provided you with to resolve the structural violence against Black and Native women, just a basic presumption level claim that all their genocides are non-unique and particularly violent insofar as they produce the worst form of cynical nihilism, which condemns Black and Native women to constant process of laboring for others, or arguments that you show affirm the particular poetics in the affirmative, which affirms the resolution as an affective comments of loneliness that finds way for being a Native and Black people it's before and with each other in spectral homeless. This does two things. First, it creates a praxis for how Native people care and support each other, where once your truth claims of pessimism are true, which is a uniqueness level for me, mean the Black and Native people due to a superstructure of violence are always a kind of committing violence to each other and to and against each other. If this is true, how do people create Native Black people create modes of being for and with? We offer a counter-theorization of care that thinks care through a refusal of labor, and one which makes a demand that people are not constantly labor to produce the home. Their argument and affective labor are subsumed by this because it isn't a question of structural relation, but how Native people relate in the midst of that structure. Second is it refuses the home as a site of domestic labor, which is particularly important because it is able to create a theory that comments in which the refusal of the demand for Black and Native women to labor is what allows the commons to exist at all. This is true because anything else is not a refusal of the home, but rather recreation. This refusal of domestic service is important because it re-theorizes the way in which conceptualization, the top of the two and is a vote for presumption. You have conceded two arguments. First is the iterative testing argument that having a praxis, i.e. all of your parameters argument says negation as a conceptualization is good, allows you iterative testing out of the way in which it scales up towards political institutions. The claim about coalitions was not that you destroy the coalitions, but that our framework argument, the net benefit for it is coalitions. This is distinctual because it's not pathologizing the mechanism, but articulating what it means to vote affirmative, i.e. the libido investments, which supercharges and supercheeses the majority of the arguments. Who does not require an affirmation of self-care, who based on performance, because poesis is not just based on performativity, i.e. the value of performativity. It explains what it means to be lonely in the context of the affirmative, i.e. the way in which self-care is constituted not through expunging wounds, but through a kind of affirmation of their constitutive facts. This is the kind of empathy argument of the one arrow, that it's not about creating empathy or understanding that everyone has a similar way in which loneliness or experiential, the way in which it's pathologized different, but the way in which superstructures of violence over determine the conceptualization degree of brokenness as a constitutive category for both, which is the basic thesis level claims which would create a kind of meta level argument because their pick does not resolve it at the form of the content, form or content, because it doesn't resolve any of the overarching superstructures, which means A, there's only a risk of voting affirmative libido arguments because it's not just a catharsis that it stops you from doing else, because our argument is not the ballot produces self-care, but articulating the ballot as an affirmation of our particular method is necessary to test strategies to produce forms of care, which is the conceptualization. This is the basic claim that we're making, that it's not that you have to negate self-care or the performance, but you can articulate different ways of reading the resolution, which is an easily negatable argument, which is or conceptualize what poesis would be, which is a negated argument. We don't turn into the double bind because we don't create a void of the unasked questions. So our evidence indicates that within spaces like debate, you can create a common that is not based on the home, which is the kind of basic level argument that constructed the black women's labor argument was answered of both. We don't blame black women labor for not being lonely enough for the argument. That's a description of the superstructure. You have to describe particular moments in the 1AC, 2AC that say that there's a conceptual labor. This is also the basic thesis level claim that they don't resolve it. They still are in structures of debate, right? The concept of negation, their pick is an investment in debate, which means you can't go for presumption when you're going for a pick, which is the basic level claims. It flips the burden to conceptualization. We don't script you, which means it's the basic argument. The correlation argument is the net benefit to voting affirmative, not a punitive argument. This is the conceptualization of the way in which the home become constituted as the basis of this argument. You've also conceded the internal link turns to the majority of their gaze of the white man argument that they are the flinch from the gratuity of violence that attempts to conceptualize it based on the pick which answers their ballot because it's not just a question of affective creation of the parameters arguments made by the distinction. They're not impacting the majority of the tour beyond a generic pathology argument. There's also no real explanation of what and all. How do you resolve any of the arguments who black women continue to labor? Our argument is in this context. If there is a social condition where black women are forced to labor to produce a home, you should refuse to make the demand to produce a home. This does not mean that this is the basic level argument. Our argument's not that you have to negate us and that is labor, i.e. you produce it. But if you did negate us, you could get compensation if you win the active back.
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
done? Are you?
Well, we're about to announce our decision.
Okay. Everybody's here. Congratulations on making it to the double octafinals of the National Debate Tournament 2018. The decision is a 3-2 for the negative from Cornell. I'm gonna try to go first quickly because I want to be there when Charles gets his decision since he's a senior. This was a difficult debate to judge. It was excellent on both sides. And it took a little while to think through portions of the debate. I'm sort of skipping the fiat portion a bit because I don't really want to parse through that per se, but I do think that the affirmative is sufficiently demonstrating that the judges are voting for a method, that the evaluation of that method is a good or bad idea, and I'm not sure that the ballot is libidinal investment. I believe the affirmative that the ballot does not offer validation of them as people or of individual self-care practice. Where I make my decision is the discussion of effective comments and what that means and what it looks like. And I think the problem is how do you engage relationally if you are not willing to be responsible for the acts of violence that you may commit in the affective commons? And so all of your non-uniqueness arguments about how violence is inevitable and we do violence to each other, that's all, I believe all of those arguments, but the question is when we are in the affective commons, how do we resolve or how do we relate to one another when those kind of violences have been done? So I don't think you have demonstrated that the negative is violent toward the affirmative, but I do think that the negative is making leeway on that you have forced an emotional labor. So, for example, Gabby's argument that the performance of the 1AC itself, its pain, its suffering, its emotion, requires black women to respond because they are structurally positioned as the mother, as the laborer. Gabby says you are not considering this structural position of the black woman when thinking about how to build relationality through the performance of the affirmative. And I think that those arguments are not well responded to in either speech by the affirmative. And at the end of the debate, I think that the sort of bottom part of the 2NR is really sort of where I make my decision, which is, you have performed the opposite of the end of the AF, because if Gabby's giving you reasons why she would say no to you or say that something's bad about what you're doing to her in that effective commons, and you all are sort of non-responsive or non-accountable about that violence that you have done. And so I think that absent a sort of engagement with Gabby about, what the sort of pain and suffering is, this sort of context of the structural position of the black woman as laborer, and the sort of non-consensual character of black women's care, which is the structural position, I'm not sure why Gabby or other black women would want to participate in an effective commons where we say, you have done something, you have harmed me in some way, and your response is nothing, right? So that's sort of how I made my decision. I'll come back and answer questions.
All right, yeah, so I think I started the question of resolving this debate by asking myself, even if you win that the distinction between the public and the private is violent and crowds out red and black coalitions, which doesn't refuse the labor of black women, but somehow uses police as disjunctured common. Even if you win, that is the affirmative, and even if you win this argument about the nature of the resolution being a telos you depart from, I think I'm still unable to resolve their argument about how this sort of still scripts black women as not properly refusing labor. I'm sort of at the end of the debate compelled to vote negative in order to structurally adjust the AF, which is a conceded framing question. I think if the nature of demand for labor is sort of inevitable as it relates to the non-distinction between the private and the public, then I think it only proves the 1AC is sort of this act of safety for non-blacks. I think that your pivot to say that we are all, committing violence sort of sets no standards for black women participating in the commons. I think the parameter debate means that the ballot's not bidirectional. I think your 2AR is very defensive to the relationality debate because I think if the negative proves they have a risk of a link on the effective labor debate, then it means their method is key to check violence in the effective commons. and then I just don't think that there's really any like risk that there's no reason why I shouldn't just like vote negative to not vote out.
So I'll start with the presumption stuff.
But also Taylor said he's gonna be back because X lost. So. Yeah. So they went to. Yeah.
No, you're just. So yeah, I started where the 2NR started with this presumption argument. I just feel like the 2NR is not adapting to the way they're explaining this iterative method testing argument that they're making in the debate, where they're like, it's good not because you're negating the idea of self-care, but because you're negating the idea of the political method that's contained within the app. And you're like, vote neg on presumption because the 1AC doesn't change or solve anything, and they're just winning like almost like the same argument that the audited apps make about their plan. They're just like, it's good to talk about these kinds of methods, even if you're not negating the self-care itself or the self-love itself, but it's good to negate and test the other parts of the app. And I think that as kind of a thread over the rest of the arguments that I evaluated, I think they're just winning that there are more pieces of the app that you can contest. And that a lot of the link arguments you're going for seem to be boiling the 1AC down to just like, well, if we can't negate Nico's self-care, then we can't negate the app. And their argument seems to be that the app is a lot more complicated than that, and that while there are portions of the app that are dedicated to that kind of like poesis or that kind of affect, that there are other portions of the 1AC that are just like theorizations of the world that you can contest and that produce meaningful debate. And I just don't think there's a lot of pushback from you on that. So I don't end up resolving the presumption argument in your direction. I also think the way they're framing this like libidinal investment with the ballot, like using the ballot to invest in that method of testing, is a good framing argument that isn't responded to well. Like you have this whole Fleischmann card. I think if you go for the ballot K and the presumption argument with the stuff that you're saying in the 2NR, like loving their wounds is violent when you attach it to the ballot, the judge shouldn't mediate that relationship, and then you pull the parts of the card that Rooney like slows down on in the 1NC that's like super applicable to the way that the app frames the like localized sites of relation and stuff like that, that you have a much better argument. But I don't think that it's explained well enough in the 2NR for me to say that the 1AR's explanation wasn't good enough. The parametrics argument, I actually agree with what Anthony said about the ballot not being bidirectional, only because you didn't answer it. This isn't like relevant to the decision at all, but I'm not sure if this decision makes like a lot of sense to me, because as a judge, like I don't vote anyway until someone tells me to vote. I don't just like presume neg until I decide yes vote or something like that, because that's like a particular way the debate tells me to decide, and like a norm of presumption. But I think that even if you win that, the app just wins that there's like an advantage to the method. So I end up not voting on the parametrics argument. So like the poetry can be anything argument that you're going for in the 2NR is, like I said above, less relevant because of those link differentiation arguments that are being made in the 1AR and the 2AR. The closest that you get to like an impact argument for this is the like judges intervene for which affect they feel closer to argument. And I'm just not really sure what to do with this because both teams seem to agree that affect is like largely inevitable, and I don't know what the ballot can possibly do to change like my relationship to that. Like you're describing a meta relationship that the judges just have to arguments, and I don't know what to do with it. Judges are kind of like leaning towards certain arguments that they feel more.
Is there a way that I could like unpack that more and kind of like make it like,
yeah.
I guess the answer affect principle?
I think so. I think that, I mean, you can even almost just like do more work in describing what I was just talking about. Just be like, we are describing a thing that is endemic to debate. That like this is how judges have to view arguments, and our argument isn't like that you should change that. Our argument is that introducing the content of the 1AC into a theater in which that is the case is bad. Right? Like debate forces the interpretation of that text in multiple and violent ways, and that's like part of the argument that you want to be making there. Their answer to the like what is the app's method / what is the metric for establishing its value over the course of the debate seems to just be like this contextualizing the poesis argument to like home and homelessness and brokenness, and I think that the fact that they're like so ahead in this contextualization of what their method and how it establishes value is, I can't really vote on the parametrics argument. I think that the Hartman argument is the most offensive argument that you have. And I think it's pretty good, but I think that you're not adjusting to the 2AC's like no link argument. They're making a really persuasive argument to me that negation is not care. And it kind of frames into this like almost the larger presumption debate, and then what we were also talking about a little bit above, but that's not like how I decided, it's just why it's persuasive to me. But negation not being care means that they're not asking for your emotional labor, and you need to be extending more of the 2AC warrants for this, because you made warrants originally that were not half as persuasive as the ones that you're making at the end of the debate, like the fact that care is co-constitutive and consensual and bidirectional. And when you're like, care is not just like asking Gabby to like engage in that emotional conversation, but that it is like a relationship, right? And that like all of these little pieces of the argument mean that debate and what the 1AC asks the labor of the debate to be never was care from the get-go, but was just contestation of a political method as if they were reading a policy act, but also kind of like included some other critical elements in it. Yeah, I can talk about some other stuff, but that's like the skeleton of my decision.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, but I think that there are some arguments that I wanted to flag specifically. Specific is the catharsis dissent. I agree with Shanara's kind of characterization that I don't think you're winning necessarily a link to that argument, especially in the way that they position the affirmative and their kind of model for debate, which is where I get into this parametrics type argument. I don't think that the AF has I think the AF does have a clear way of testing. I think they give a number of different examples of how you could have contested the affirmative without negating someone's individual sense of care. I come close to voting on the link that the forced labor argument, but I'm unsure of how at the end of the debate how the 1NC is not also a call for production, at least in the relation to the criticism of superstructure that the 1AC is positing. Like you're really good on like the link and impact, like or like the link and like how the link turns the case level, like in the 2NR, but you're really light on how this, like me voting negative to vote affirmative, resolves some of the offense in this debate, at least in a way that is like non-resolute or at least not worse than the affirmative. I just think at the end of the day, I vote affirmative because this argument about voting negative to not evaluate the debate it seems to be a hypothetical and not something that is actually performed by the negative. And also that seems weird because in order to not make a decision in a debate in which there are responses to your argument about the fact that I should defer to you, which would mean that I would have to think about the debate by you just positing it into this space, seems to performatively contradict itself once the debate has commenced. So like I think there needs to be a better way of contextualizing that. I'm also agree with Chris on the specificity of their refusal for labor and and the concept of homelessness as being constitutive of that structure, which is something that your individual refusal in this instance, you never say how that addresses, because they kind of cast like all of your links as not being things that they commit, even like the way in which they're positioned in this debate as being choices that they can make, but that ones that are determined by structure. And then they make these arguments about how all of your impacts are essentially inevitable in the world of the status quo, which puts the burden, which kind of contextualizes their presumption argument, which is like, they give a couple of examples of how like you appeal and invest in like the same type of argumentative form, because that's like the link, is that it wasn't the content, but the form in which they presented it in a debate form that it is demanding forced labor on behalf of black women. But then they isolate like the use of debate technique, the use of the concept of a pick or something like that as being invested in the same type of structure, which kind of supercharges their non-unique claim, which is why I am looking extra hard as to how like the alternative or whatever the negative is positing as the option of not doing the affirmative would then have to resolve that for me to vote negative in some sort of sense. I almost voted negative on this just jurisdiction argument, but I do think that their testing being good arguments and their answers on the parametrics argument kind of kind of solve that. I would have liked you to differentiate that jurisdiction argument in the context of the subjectivity of the individual judges, because I think that that's the way that argument makes more sense. Like, me and Leonardi as white subjects probably shouldn't try to decide this debate, but that the three people of color might, they should probably get a different instruction. I'm not sure if the instruction should be you should resolve the debate, because then it's like forcing all the labor on the people of color in the room. But there needs to be, like, I think a differentiation of that jurisdiction argument in that same context. Like, is it beneficial for, like, the people of color on the panel to, like, not think about these issues and just defer one way or the other? Like, maybe it might be, maybe the affirmative is right, and that there is something beneficial to, you know, at least attempting and trying to do these things. And that's another thing I think the affirmative is pretty good on. It's just like that, look, like, all the things you're describing about in terms of debate are inevitable. Like, us all being here, like the fact that they present something and that it requires a response and that judges are required to render a decision means that we have to develop some type of strategy that is more effective than just doing nothing. And that's why they get their net benefit of, like, this kind of coalition building type argument, where it's like, it's not that that means the neg alternative is a bad idea, like you destroy coalitions with your strategies, but that the affirmative is the only one with a potential avenue to those things. And I think that's something that you should make very explicit about the nature of negation under the world of the affirmative, which is that it doesn't necessarily, you can think of it not necessarily as like an affirmative in a negative debate in like a traditional sense. They can be more where the role of the negative isn't necessarily to prove that the app is a bad idea, but merely that the negative's performance is better, which is shifts things to be more positive and conversational, and also competition changes. I don't know if you remember, like, old school plan debate, like where people would read like two affirmatives against each other, and it'd be about comparing quality of internal links, which would then be the way in which judges would decide debates. You could say that, like, your model of debates, or at least the orientation of the WinAC, at least creates like a space in which we can have non-competitive, not competitive in the sense of like competition, but in traditional debate competition forms of discussion, that even when we do engage in contact, even when we do engage in clash, there's a way we can rehabilitate or cope with that fact in a way that still allows us to do the dirty tasks of moving forward on trying to resolve some of these structural issues. Because I was like, I wish it was kind of more of this leveraging of like nihilism and like optimism, like being kind of gestured at in the 2 hours, more like a focus earlier on in the debate, which been a clear way of like distinguishing like the orientation of like the 1AC from like the 1NC. And that's one thing I think you should be doing a little bit better, is like cast the 1NC as a method, even if it is like a non-method, and then use that as a means like to compare against the affirmative, which is maybe then some way you may get some of the other ballots on here being able to at least resolve at least some of their method, or at least contextualize some of the double turn arguments, because that's inevitably how I ended up voting for your alls. I think that there is a risk of like a double turn almost in the way that you've kind of executed some of these types of arguments, which then makes it difficult for me to say that there's a unique reason why the app is a bad idea. So, I'll do that. Yes.
I'm